And he resolved it in the most brilliant way. I forever am impressed the way he resolved this problem. Gurudas was doing the ceremony, the actual fire sacrifice. So he instructed Gurudas to do the entire ceremony for this other couple first. From the mantras and the achman and the bananas in the fire, everything was done, the cloth was tied together. And at that point, Gurudas started a second separate fire. So my first meeting with Srila Prabhupada was in March of 1971. And I have to give a little bit of the history so we can understand the circumstances. I had a friend, John, who's now Yadubara Das, and he and I were in college together, majoring in photography. I was an undergraduate and he was a graduate student. So he decided to do his master's thesis on the Hare Krishna people. And he went to India sometime in the winter of 1970. And after he had been there a few months, he wrote to me and said I should come and join him. So I did that, and that's how I arrived in Bombay in March of 1971. Now in college I had done a term project on close-up photography. And I had taken that term project to a publisher in New York, and it gradually evolved into a small book about close-up photography. Kind of a specialty book. So when I went to India, I brought that with me. So about a day after I had arrived in Bombay, John said we should go and meet the Swami. At that time, the devotees had a temple in a building called ISKCON, which is right by the ocean. And the temple was on the 7th floor. So it was a very, when we went into Prabhupada's room on the 7th floor of ISKCON, immediately it was a very kind of a spacious, airy feeling because the windows were open, the sea breeze was blowing through, a lot of natural light, very nice. And the room was very simple. Prabhupada sat on a white small cushion behind a table, as he traditionally did. Very relaxed. So I was there with John, and John introduced me and explained who I was a little bit. And then he took the book, my book, which I had under my arm, and said to Prabhupada, here, she has done this. So Prabhupada very graciously and gentlemanly-like took the book, and he looked through it for a minute, thumbing through the pages, and then he handed it back and said, we do not know much about these things. I actually was considering when I brought the book that here's a saintly person, why should I show a saintly person a book about close-up photography? It didn't seem appropriate. So by saying that, Prabhupada confirmed my idea that it wasn't really appropriate. But it was, I had the impression of a very peaceful, I wouldn't say transcendental, I wasn't thinking that way at all, but pleasant person to be around. Well, my initiation took place November 29th, 1971. And at the time, Prabhupada had taken a group of devotees to Vrindavan, India, and he had before the initiation, he had personally given us a tour of the different holy places, which was truly wonderful. He took us to Brasana. At that point, he rode on the palanquin. The devotees carried on a palanquin around Brasana. And he took us to Govardhan Hill, and he bathed with us in the Jamuna. It was an extraordinary time. So this time of our initiation, it was early in the morning on the 29th of November. Quite a cold time in Vrindavan. And there was another couple who wanted to get married at the same ceremony. Yadabar and I were going to be married, and I was going to be initiated. And this other couple, the husband-to-be, approached Prabhupada saying that he also wanted to marry this woman. The unfortunate part about it was that he had already been married to a devotee, and he had left that woman. And this second proposed wife was already pregnant. So it was rather a dishonorable, more than rather, it was a dishonorable circumstance. But at the same time, so from that point of view, Prabhupada couldn't say yes. But from another point of view, he couldn't say no because the first wife was already gone. The second proposed wife was already pregnant. So how could he say no? It became an enigma. And he resolved it in the most brilliant way. I forever am impressed the way he resolved this problem. Gurudas was doing the ceremony, the actual fire sacrifice. So he instructed Gurudas to do the entire ceremony for this other couple first. From the mantras and the achman and the bananas in the fire, everything was done, the cloth was tied together. And at that point, Gurudas started a second, separate fire sacrifice for my initiation in our wedding. And at that point, Prabhupada came out of his room and sat on the Vyasasana. So without saying anything, he made a very clear statement. It was, what can you say, it was a genius, just a genius solution to a very uncomfortable situation. So the ceremony went on, and at the end, Prabhupada asked me the 4 rules and regulations for the initiation part of it. So I managed, I had rehearsed that, so I managed to explain what they were. And then he said, how many rounds every day? So I said 16, feeling very confident of myself. And he looked at me right in the eyes, and although we had looked at each other before this was the first time it was at such close distance. And that was since that was the first of several times after that this happened, it was a most memorable experience. Prabhupada's eyes were dark, and they seemed bottomless, truly bottomless. And at the same time, I felt for the first time in my life, and only with him, that he saw way past the obvious, way past the body, and even past the mind. He could actually perceive my consciousness, which, it's a little discomforting because my consciousness was far from what it should be, unfortunately. So you could say it was a penetrating look, but ordinarily, when you use the word penetrating, it connotes maybe critical or judgmental, but it was none of those things. It was a very kind, gentle look. And at that time, since it was the first time, I was quite surprised by how perceptive I felt he was. And in the future, when he used to look at me, my reaction would be that, first of all, that I was not where I should be in terms of my Krishna consciousness. But rather than being discouraged, I wanted to increase, to try to please him by my Krishna consciousness from his very perceptive look. So when I said 16, and he gave me that look, right, eye to eye at such close distance, and then he said, that is the minimum. 16 is the minimum. So now I just do the minimum. At least I do the minimum. But anyway. And then it was time for him to give me my name. I was the only initiate, so he hadn't bothered to think of a name. It was rather insignificant. So he asked Shamsundar, do we have a Vishaka? After a moment of thinking. So Shamsundar went to another room. Apparently they had some record of all the initiates. And he looked it up, and he came back and told Prabhupada, there is a Vishaka, but she's left. So Prabhupada turned to me and said, your name is Vishaka. And after the initial meeting, John and I had this idea. We were very young and idealistic. So we had an idea that we would do a photo essay about a quaint Indian village and make a cultural presentation that people could appreciate traditional life in India. So we thought this was a wonderful idea. We were beside ourselves with our own brilliance. But the problem was, of course, in India there are thousands upon thousands of villages. And we had no idea which one would be the most suitable for a story like that, a photo essay. So John said, well, Srila Prabhupada's from India, and he's traveled extensively. We should ask him where to go. So we went that morning back to Akashganga, and again into Srila Prabhupada's room. And John presented to him our idea. So Prabhupada looked at us. I'm sure we were flushed with the fervence and of our idea and the enthusiasm that comes with such a young age. And he said, wherever you go, they will simply cheat you and steal your cameras. So from our body language, we must have been crestfallen. We didn't say anything. And there was quite a pregnant pause. And he looked at us. And then he said, best that you go to Vrindavan and do your photo essay in Vrindavan. So some months later, we did that. Not right away, but maybe 4 or 5 months later, we actually did that. And probably the most remarkable thing about that pastime with Srila Prabhupada is that Srila Prabhupada had only seen me twice, and he knew nothing about me. And unfortunately, I came from an atheistic background. My parents were atheists, and until I went to the temple in New York, about a year or so before I met Srila Prabhupada, I had never been in any church or temple or any sort of religion, not even to see the stained glass. That's how bad it was. So he, by his instruction to go to Vrindavan, now looking back on that decades later, there was nothing more appropriate he could have said to me, because that month that we spent in Vrindavan was truly transformational for me. I would wander the streets, and everywhere you go, of course, there are temples, and even beyond the temples was the piety and the spirituality of the residents of Vrindavan. Everyone's saying Jai Radhe and has devotion foremost in their lives. So what can you say? That instruction of Prabhupada could not have been more appropriate. So now, Calcutta Temple in those times had many problems. Among them, for instance, the temple was not very clean, kind of reflected the city of Calcutta, and the prasadam was substandard, and perhaps because of these problems and being out of their own culture, the Western devotees fought amongst themselves quite regularly. The way the temple was designed in those days, to go from the office to the prasadam area, which was on the porch, you had to actually walk through the temple room. So I have memories of the GBC and the temple president walking through the temple room, arguing with each other about something. This is just an idea of the atmosphere in the temple. There was also tension between the men and the women. There was even one sannyasi who enjoyed leading, but he was very particular about how the various instruments were played. And if he didn't like the way an instrument was being played, he would walk up to the devotee playing it and say, "Give me that thing," and take it away from the person. So I was thinking during this time, I don't need this in my life. I have other things to do. I should really, just go on with life, get a life, as they say. But the thing that kept me was the mantra, not the Maha Mantra, but the mantra was, Prabhupada is coming. Prabhupada is coming. You can't leave now. He'll be here very soon. So I was hanging on by a very thin thread. And Prabhupada did come in October. And that was extraordinary. He immediately saw the situation. And he had an istagosti. So everyone in the temple came to his room. When I go into that room now, it's the office of the temple president, but I still remember where I sat and where Prabhupada sat. And he gave the most wonderful talk. It was the first time, although I had heard Prabhupada lecture, I'd never been to an istagosti and had never been so affected by someone's talk as I was by this. It was never taped and I didn't take notes. But basically he was talking about tolerance and patience and transcending problems. And at one point I remember specifically he gave the example of his own life. That when he came to New York, he was staying with someone who kept meat in their refrigerator. And the way he said the word meat with such disgust, I realized for the first time how austere that must have been for him, a person of such caliber. So when I left at the end of that, I actually felt lighter walking out of that room on that occasion. It was a transformation in my consciousness. As I said, the conditions were not good, so John and I were not feeling comfortable living in the temple there. So at one point, we were together in Prabhupada's room, and John said to Prabhupada, referring to the conditions, perhaps we should live outside and just come to the temple, and in that way we could avoid the problems. So Prabhupada said, yes, you can do that, there is no problem. But even though there's so many problems, still it is better here. So in Calcutta especially that's true, but I think almost that could be said in any temple, in any city. The devotees again traveled to Jaipur, and we were hosted at the various Gaudiya Maths in Jaipur. And one particular time, it was the noon arti. The Pujari was doing the arti, and Prabhupada was standing fairly close to the altar, and the devotees were somewhat back having a kirtan. So I was photographing Prabhupada at that time, and I noticed that he was looking around trying to catch someone's attention. The devotees were absorbed in the kirtan, so they didn't notice him, so he just caught my eye. So he called me over like this, and I went, since the kirtan was loud, I had to put my ear right next to his mouth to hear him. So he said, do you have any rupees? So I put my mouth next to his ear and I said, no, but I can get some. How much? So again he said, he thought for a second, he said 10. So I went around and I found some devotee who was a little on the side, not so much participating, and I said, Prabhupada wants 10 rupees. So immediately he gave me the 10 rupees. And the bill was flat at that point. And I went up and I handed it to Srila Prabhupada. And Prabhupada carefully folded it in half and folded it again. And he kept it with his folded palms. He kept the rupee note in his palms like this as the arti went on. And then at the end, the Pujari blew the conch shell, signaling the end of the arti. And Prabhupada took that 10 rupee note and put it in the donation box. So then I remembered after that I had read that when you come before Radha Krishna, you should make some offering. And Prabhupada was observing that etiquette at that point. I was photographing Srila Prabhupada here in Los Angeles while he was sitting on the Vyasa-san. And Rameshwar had asked me to take pictures of Srila Prabhupada with his eyes open, because they were for the various Chaitanya Charitamritas and Bhagavatams, and he felt it was more suitable. So at this point, I wouldn't take pictures during the lecture because the flash and the shutter disturbed Prabhupada, so I would take them during the Radhamadhava prayers. And this particular day, Prabhupada had his eyes tightly shut for a long, long time. So I was just sitting, waiting for him to open his eyes. And it went on, for many, many mantras. And then, quite unexpectedly, I felt this thump on my backside. And I looked around, and a sannyasi had hit me with his danda, indicating that I had been there long enough and I should move on. That was the spot for all the sannyasis. And there I was, right at his feet. So I looked at Prabhupada, and at that moment he had his eyes open, and he had seen what had transpired. And he looked at the sannyasi with the most harsh, stern look, like a very displeased father. And I was grateful that that look had not been cast upon me, because it was withering. And then he looked at me, and I took my pictures, and then I did leave. And I was more amazed. Besides that pastime, what amazed me even more than that was, although the temple room was packed, people had come from all over the West Coast for this occasion. No one said anything to me. No one remarked, hey, I saw that, blah, blah. It was mystical that had happened in a room full of devotees, hundreds of devotees, and no one had seen it. It was between the three of us. Again, in Bombay in the early days, in the early 70s, Prabhupada would go just before dawn, really, when it was still quite dark. He would go down the steps of the house where he was living and walk to the Juhu beach for his morning walk. So every day I would go with him, and I would meet him when he came down the stairs. So one morning I was sitting on a landing, just chanting. And I didn't hear, it was dark, I couldn't see very well, and I didn't hear Prabhupada coming. He came very softly. And as he passed right in front of me, I could have touched him with my arm. He said, oh, thank you very much. And all I was doing was chanting japa. He was so appreciative and encouraging of a small effort. So this is, again, a morning walk in Bombay. And a woman life member was taking a small group of us so Prabhupada could walk in a pleasant area. And after the walk, we all piled back in the car, and it happens very often in India, practically every time. Some beggars came to the car, a woman carrying a small child, and she had other children with her, very much in need of assistance. And she was begging from Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada took some paisa and put it in the hands of all these different children and the woman. And, I had read Bhagavad Gita and Charity and the Mode of Ignorance and all that. So I thought, I had the audacity to ask Srila Prabhupada, why are we giving money to beggars? And Srila Prabhupada didn't say anything. And so I immediately felt that I had been, made some offensive remark. So I answered my own question, there was just silence, and I said, is it because this is transcendental? And he said yes. So from that I could understand, coming from his hand, from the hand of the pure devotee, it may be a different category coming from someone else's hand. But it was a wonderfully instructive moment as well. At some point, Prabhupada would spend many hours looking for suitable land for our temple in Juhu. And he was living at the home of a life member, Kartikeya Mahadevya, a very wonderful person with his family. And he gave Srila Prabhupada all facility. And in the evenings, Prabhupada would lecture in his home. And occasionally guests would come, besides the regular devotees, guests would come. And on one occasion, this guest was a sadhu of sorts. At least he presented himself as a sadhu. And Prabhupada observed him, and I also noticed Prabhupada was observing this person. And the person was looking at Prabhupada's female disciples. It became noticeable, after, it wasn't that obvious, but if you just looked at him for a little while, you could see. So in the course of his lecture, Prabhupada recited the verse by King Kulashekar that after I've been engaged in chanting these names of Krishna, when I think of sex life, my face turns and I spit on the thought. He said that in Sanskrit. And he asked the sadhu, what is the meaning of this? And the sadhu, he said some other meaning. He didn't say, he was thinking of another shloka. He didn't give the translation for that shloka. And Prabhupada said, no. And he gave the proper translation. And to me, again, this was Prabhupada's gentlemanly way of making a clear point and helping this person. Jai Anilo Premadana Koruna Prachu.
So we're sitting there next to the cooker. At that point, we had just two, those gas Indian burners had two flames in the gas bottle, and we would make a bucket of coal fire to do his chapatis, because they would come out better on that. Sat down, had the tiffin with all the spices and all the vegetables. Prabhupada sat down. In the meantime, he just kept casually talking to Bhagaji in Hindi. And so I had the tiffin, he put the spice in, this spice in, that spice in, and this vegetable in, this vegetable in. And he looked at Bhagaji and he said, so simple, still they cannot do. And then we just sat there and he was chatting with Bhagaji. And so as he was chatting, Palika was concerned that it was too hot. So she would turn the burner down and he would chat and he'd look and probably turn it back up. Didn't say anything and chat. And then 3 minutes ago, Palika would turn it down again. And this happened 3 times. And he turned down, he goes, Hari Baba, why are you messing? So, we kind of just stood back, and then he looked at Bhagaji and he said, these 2 burners, he said, I can make, he said in 45 minutes, I can make full prasad for 100 people. Bhagaji looked and said, impossible. And Prabhupada said, I will bet you. And Bhagaji said, yeah, khichdi. And Prabhupada said, no, full prasad in 45 minutes. And they started speaking in Hindi then again. And Bhagaji said, impossible. And Prabhupada said, I will bet you 1 lakh of rupees. And Bhagaji started to laugh, and he said, Prabhupada, if I win or lose, you will take it anyway. It said, he started laughing, then he just stood up without another word and said, it's finished. And then he walked out, and the kind of energy just went right back with him, right out the door. So that was my first time, him coming into the kitchen and cutting up and speaking. Truthfully, nothing ever tasted like when she brought it from her own home. And I think it's because she made everything in mustard oil. But the taste was exquisite. And Prabhupada did say that if you want to eat for taste, you eat with mustard oil. If you want to eat for health, you eat with ghee. And the things that came from Pishima's hands that she brought from her home, we could never duplicate. So the cooking early on, she was cooking, she used a lot of, so she wasn't using the mustard oil, but she would use a lot of mustard seeds and grind them to a paste, and that would bring out a flavor of mustard. So after maybe 2 weeks of this, Prabhupada he started swelling. He was complaining to me, don't let her make this, don't let her make that. And then I was trying to taper her off. Pishma, you can't do this, Pishma, you can't. And so then about the third day, because at least if she didn't grind them, she started putting, they were floating on everything. And the third day Prabhupada he looked at me and said, do not let her in the kitchen. Do not let her back in the kitchen. And I did not have the heart to tell her she couldn't come in the kitchen. I loved her dearly. And she adored Prabhupada. And so next morning when it was time to come in, there was Pishima, and we came in, we'd sit down in a little circle. It was like a little ritual. We would begin, and a lot of it was eyes, body language, and feelings, and the few little words that I would do. And she'd have her foot knife, and we'd begin, and she had a stone. We had to grind everything. Prabhupada wanted everything fresh. I would take an extra hour and a half in the morning and grind cumin, but at that time he was taking wet paste. It wasn't dry. I would grind with water. I'd grind on the stone, silbata. And so I'd have all my katoris of ginger paste, chili paste, black pepper paste, and cumin, and right on down the line, mustard seeds, posta. And so we were grinding, and Pishma was getting her vegetables together, and she asked me for the sarson. In Bengali, it's mustard seeds. And I looked and I said, Pishima, Prabhupada bolo ne sarson. And she'd look at me, and I'd say, and she had these big cow eyes, and she'd look at me, and I could hardly resist her, and so I went into my katori, and I took one seed, and I looked and I said, Pishima, bas. And she looked at me, she couldn't believe I was being so cruel. But she took that, we started laughing, she was smiling, she took that one seed and threw a little water and began to grind. And if you know what the stone looks like, it has pits, to grind. So I don't know where she got, and she was going like this, and she got it, and we were laughing. And somewhere or other she got something that she could put in there. But, and at that time Prabhupada hadn't come out to darshan. I hadn't seen Prabhupada in 2 weeks, physically, and he hadn't eaten anything that you could count in the palm of your hand in that amount of time. And when I walked in, it was a bit of a shock. He didn't have his kurta on. He had a top piece, and he was sitting, and he had his knee up, and his dhoti over his knee, so his knee was showing. And his collarbone was jutting out. He was so thin. And it immediately put me in a space when I saw him. And I went up, but I couldn't hear his voice. His voice was very weak. So I moved a little closer. Couldn't hear him. I had to come maybe 5 inches from his face to hear his voice. And I was right into his face. And he looked at me and he said, I have not eaten anything solid for 2 weeks. And I started to cry, and the tears started to come down my face. And he saw that, and he looked at me, and he said, but I'm eating this thing, Gata. And everybody roared. There was Krishna Maharaj, there was Bhakti Charu, and Upendra. Upendra was there. And everybody roared and said, Jai Prabhupada. And so then he said, but I'm eating the cigar. And I started to smile. And he looked at me and he said, so you can cook. And so I sat back and on my knee, I sat back from him. And he said, but, and he became a little stern. And he said, but, he said, you must shop, you must cook, and you must clean. And he said, and you must have no assistance. It was very firm. And then his voice softened and he said, is that all right? I smiled and I said, of course, Srila Prabhupada. And then he looked around at the men and he said, and no men are to be in the kitchen when she is there. And then he looked at Abhiram and he said, if you need assistance, your husband can do. And he left it like that. After Prabhupada would eat, he wanted his remnants distributed. And he would ask me if I was distributing them daily. And truthfully, I really disliked this part of it because everybody was very fussy. And it would take me about a half an hour. I'd walk 2 floors of the building that he was staying in. And everybody would, I'd put everything on the plate and go around and, oh, give me this, give me that, no, I don't want that, give me that. And it was like this, and it was kind of even a rivalry and a fight, between some of the men that would want certain things. And every day it was a trip for me. And it would take me quite some time to go around, and people knew when probably finished, and they'd kind of wander out of their rooms, and everyone was in the halls waiting for this plate to go through. And one day, and so Prabhupada said to me, he said, you were distributing? And I said, yes, Prabhupada. And he said, I want you to mix everything. He said, mix. And I said, oh, okay. So that day when I went down, but I didn't only mix, I took it and I kneaded it. I took everything, the shukta, the sweet rice, the raita, the dal, the sandash, and I would go like this and just mix it like I was doing dough. And I want to tell you something, nobody wanted it. Nobody. I walked the halls, and after 2 or 3 days, not a soul was out. Nobody was out. And when I would give them, it was like, oh, just a little bit. They would take this much. And I would go down, and I would eat the whole thing myself, because I couldn't distribute it. And every day I got this whole plate. And I'm telling you, it was the sweetest nectar. I loved it. It was just mixed, but it was so divine. And I was done in 2 minutes. I'd walk the halls, not a soul would be out. I'd go up to the next floor, not a soul would be out. And everybody knew before the time, it was out of every room, there was somebody out the door. And I'd just stop, talk, argue, this, give me that. And it took me 30 minutes to distribute his maha. And after a few days, there was not a soul to be seen. And I would come down, eat the whole thing. And after about 4 or 5 days, Prabhupada looked at me during lunch and he said, so, you are mixing? I said, yes, Prabhupada, this is a very good system. I said, I am mixing. I said, it's very good. And he shook his head like that. Oh, it was terrible, but it was truly delicious. It was truly delicious. And I ended up getting the mercy because nobody wanted it. And I relished that. So then at this point, Tamal Krishna Maharaj had come in about the green card, and he came in with a card, and he said, Prabhupada, or he came in with a note he had written down from the phone. He said, Prabhupada, America is waiting for you. He said, the customs are ready, immigration is ready. He said, everything is cleared. Prabhupada immediately began to cry. He said, I am so indebted to America. He said, America's given me so much. He said, he's given me men, money. He said, I am so indebted. And it was like, here it was about America, and he started to show this softness. And then Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, Prabhupada, you once said that you were like a cow, and you would go wherever your devotees would lead you and give. He said, but the one thing I don't see, I don't understand. He said, somehow or other you never dry up. He said, you're always giving. And Prabhupada looked and he smiled. He said, yes, that is because I'm Surabi cow. And we all started to laugh. I was at Kumbh Mela with Prabhupada. And this was not Magh Mela, it was Kumbh Mela, which comes every so many years. And this one was another very special one that only came every 112 years. Or this one, the Kumbh comes, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but every 112. But this one was an extremely special one. That was the arrangement of the stars was something in 1,000 years. It was a very significant Kumbh Mela, and they were expecting millions and millions and millions of people. And I came in again early to get everything going. This is on the banks of rivers. So everybody just, it's nothing there, but all of a sudden it becomes a city. And you set up tents, and we made mud stoves right on the banks, put a pipe in, and you have river water. It's running water. And this is in January, and it is so cold. We were in Allahabad. It was so cold. So cold. So cold that Prabhupada left because they had such a bad situation, but that's just something else of the story. And so we were going on for several days, and Prabhupada's tent was there, and the ladies had a tent, and the men had a tent. Then they had big mud fires for the main cooking for distribution and for the devotees. And then over here by Prabhupada's tent, they had those aluminum siding, like that rippled stuff. And they had a little square box for him to shower. It didn't go down to the ground. You could see his knees. It came from about here up. And his kitchen was the same thing. They had this aluminum siding, but it had the mud stoves. But it was very windy, and we were on the banks of the river, so it was nothing but sand. It was the confluence of the Saraswati, the Yamuna, I think it's the Ganga. They come together. And I'm always of the type that I always want to purify it. I want the punya. I want to do what's right, and I want, to get liberation, and I want mukti, and I want to participate in Kumbh Mela. And so it was a certain day, a certain time that everybody was supposed to go bathe. It happened to be at around 11:40. It was 11:20 something that you were supposed to be in the water. And everybody from our camp left the day. So everybody went except Prabhupada's servant, which was Harisari, getting a massage, and Prabhupada's cook. Everybody else got to go. But at that time, Palika and I were together. And so the three of us stayed back. And there was a part of me in my mind lamenting that I wanted to be in the water. I wanted to be there with that moment of purification, not knowing what I was having back at the camp, with Prabhupada in my service. And so, oddly enough, for about four days I was meditating on this one thing. Prabhupada would come every day out from his massage. He kept his routine no matter where he was. Timely, everything. The time was very important to him. And so he'd come out and he would go, in which my little tap, my sink was right 2 feet at the most from his shower stall. And then the mud stoves were another 2 feet from that. So I was at my tap every day somehow or other washing something, either a pot or vegetable, where Prabhupada would come take off his shoes, his slippers, open the door and go into the shower. And every single day his foot would come out of that, his foot would go like that, looking for his shoe because they were facing the opposite direction when he walked in. And he would have to turn them around with his feet before he'd open the door, and then he'd put his shoes on, open the door, and he'd walk out. And I was always right there, and I was watching. I was a foot and a half from his legs when he was taking his shower. So for a few days I kept trying to work up this idea that I'm going to put his shoes on him. and I had been so mental about this for several days that I was a bit nervous. And so I thought, well, today I'm going to do it. And it was just at the time he came out, first he went in. So I made sure I was there at the tap. Here it was, everybody was gone, they were in the water. And I'm watching out of the corner of my eye for that foot to start going like that. And if I would have actually been more mindful, I would have just turned him around and just forgotten about it. But I wanted this act of putting his shoes on him. And so I saw the foot come out, and I immediately turned and I said, Prabhupada, I'll do it. But because I'd been planning this for 3 days, I was so mental. I turned the shoes around, but then I thought they're wrong, so I went like that with my hands real quick, like scrambling something. And as I turned them so fast, he was already in the motion of stepping. So when he stepped on my arm, and he pinned me down to the ground. His foot landed like the middle of my palm to the middle of my forearm, so I couldn't bend, so it actually made me go down to the ground. He didn't get off. Like if you actually hit someone or touch someone, there's an automatic kind of, where you move back. He didn't move. And I was down on the ground, and I had to go further because my arm here, so it took my elbow down, so I had to go further to the ground. And he slowly, it seemed like eternity, he took all the weight that was in that leg and continued to press. And he put all his weight on that one leg, not saying a word, took his other foot, moved it around to move the shoe that I'd switched, and moved the shoe back, and then put his foot in that shoe, and then slowly like this, shifting his weight, went to the other foot, lifted his foot up, picked up the other shoe, opened the door, and then just walked out. Didn't say a word, but had his composure. And I was down, speaking of the fool, I was down waiting to get kicked in the head. I mean, that's what I was expecting when I thought, oh, you foolish woman. I'm down there, and he left all his weight, didn't jerk back, proceeded to shift his weight on my arm till he took the foot and moved it around, and then slowly shifted back, came back up, opened the door, and just walked like this golden light had just passed me by. And Polika, she was in shock what I had done. I didn't discuss this with her, what my mental state was. And she immediately ran over and took my arm, and she was doing my arm to her head. And then I sat and I thought, Shri, but you are so bad. Here you are wanting the mercy of Kumbh Mela. Here you are thinking this, and you're here, and the pure devotee has just stepped on you. And you're wondering and looking where the mercy is. It's hello. It's right here. And I was flying. I couldn't wait for the devotees to get back. I went around. I remember Guru Das was there. He was sannyasi at the time. And he came back and I went running. I said, you're not going to believe. And I remember Abrahama's face was in shock that I was so expressive, and here I was to a sannyasi. But I was just bubbling over, and he was enjoying it. We were talking, and I was telling him what happened, and he described another story to me. But it made me see where the real blessings were at home. Jai Anilo Premadana Koruna Prachu.
Rama Rama Hare Hare Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prishthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Asajade Shatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda Jaya Jaya Gaur Bhaktavinda Jaya Gaur Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare.
परमहंस परविकाचार्य अष्टोतत्व शत श्री श्रीमद हिज डिवाइन ग्रेस एसी भक्ति वेदांता स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परविकाचार्य अष्टोतत्व शत श्री श्रीमद हिज डिवाइन ग्रेस भक्ति सिद्धांत गोस्वामी महाराज की, अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की, हरिदास ठाकुर की, प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद की, श्री श्री राधा कुंड श्याम कुंड गोप गोपीनाथ गोवर्धन की, वृंदावन धाम की, मथुरा धाम की, नवदीप मायापुर धाम की, जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की, गंगा माई की, यमुना माई की, तुलसी देवी की, भक्ति देवी की, गौर प्रेमानंदी हरि हरि बोल। All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. की जय।
Namaste Nara Shingaya Namaste Nara Shingaya Dahine Prahlad Ladye Dahine Hiranyakashi Purvaksha Hiranyakashipu Tanobringa Keshavadita Narari Rupa Jai Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Jaya Jagadisha Hare Viनाशक लक्ष्य संगवान की प्रहलाद महाराज की गोप्रमानंदी।
हरे कृष्णा हरे कृष्णा हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे Hare Ram, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. So we welcome all of you to today's Sunday feast program. Thank you so much for joining and giving us your association. So today, Her Grace Anusayam Devi Dasi Mataji has a important service to take care of. So I have been given this service to announce, to make all the announcements. So once again, we welcome all of you, and we have few new devotees with us today. Bhupendra Prabhu, thank you so much for joining us today. So Prabhuji has, and Mataji, Pammi Mataji, right? Name of Mataji's name? Panna Mataji, sorry. So Panna Mataji and Bhupendra Prabhu, welcome you. Prabhuji has and Mataji has moved from New Jersey to Hershey. So we hope to see you on every Sunday. And we will add you to our mailing list so that you will be aware of all the programs, all the festivals in ISKCON of Harrisburg. Anyone else who is here for the first time with few devotees with mask is a little difficult for me to. Anyone else who is here for the first time? Okay, wonderful. So first announcement is next week, starting next Sunday, we will resume our usual program schedule. Because of pandemic, we were having a little different schedule, but starting next Sunday, we'll be back to our old schedule, and we will start with our 6-hour Kirtan program, Sankirtan program on next Sunday, starting at 2 p.m. So again, next Sunday, August 1st, at 2 p.m., we'll have 6 hours Harinam Sankirtan. Harinam Sankirtan ki Jai. And so please help us spread around the word about this special program on next Sunday. Then from August 8th, the following Sunday, we'll resume our in-person classes, lectures. So we are starting with an 18 weeks Bhagavad Gita course. Every Sunday we will have one chapter of Bhagavad Gita will be covered by our special guest speaker. And the topic is Summary of Bhagavad Gita for Modern Times. And it will be covered by different speakers on each Sunday. And anyone wants to have if you have any question or you want to know more about this special series of 18 weeks, please feel free to contact Ansuya Mataji. Then July 31st, that will be Saturday, the last Saturday of the month, we will have our monthly Harinam Sankirtan in the, I believe the address is, our usual address, the corner of Walmart Street Bridge and Front Street. Beautiful location. And for more information, please contact Jeet Prabhu and Bhakt Brad. They will be leading this Harinam Sankirtan. So it will be 31st July, Saturday, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Then August 22nd, Sunday, we'll celebrate appearance day of Lord Balram, Hari Bol, who is non-different from Lord Krishna, just a different mood, different flavor, right? Then August 30th, Monday, it's a Monday, August 30th, very special celebration. Janmashtami ki Jai. So it will be a special program on Monday, August 30th, from 8 p.m. to midnight. So it will include Abhishek, Kirtan, feast, of course, and we will open our gift shop again. Gift shop will be open on August 30th again. And we will do midnight Aarti to celebrate birth of Lord Krishna. Then the next day of Janmashtami is Srila Prabhupada's appearance day. So that is August 31st, Tuesday, starting at 5:30 p.m. Srila Prabhupada's 125th Vyas Puja. Very special. So all over the world, ISKCON is celebrating 125th Vyas Puja of Srila Prabhupada in a very, very grand manner. So as ISKCON of Harrisburg, we will try to celebrate as grand as possible to participate in the celebration. And the program details are still being planned, but the program will definitely start at 5:30 p.m. on that Tuesday. And more information and more detailed schedule will be distributed via temple email. And we will continue to have our box prasadam, so please do not leave without taking the prasadam from downstairs. And everybody is most welcome if you want to spend some more time with each other outside the temple in the backyard or front yard. You can also take some chairs as long as you can put it back in the downstairs. So feel free to honor prasadam here. And before we leave, please take darshan of the deities, and again, don't forget to pick up the prasadam box. Hare Krishna, thank you so much again. We look forward to see all of you again on next Sunday. Hari Bol. Again, next Sunday is 2 p.m. Hari Bol.